Hi everyone, I'm David Scranton. Think back to when you were a kid, right? You saved up your allowance to buy something special. Right? Maybe it's a bike, maybe it was even your first car. Well, if you were successful, it was because you had a goal. And today, we're talking about goal setting. You guessed it, it's that time again, time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Without goals, we lack focus. And without focus, we're much less likely to succeed. And that's certainly true when it comes to retirement planning. And that's why when you watch this show, you always hear me stress this point. Well, today I'm going to stress it again. But I'm also going to give you helpful tips on how to set your specific retirement goals and then plan to achieve them. Specifically, we're talking about how and when to start the goal setting process, and some important things that you might need to consider when setting your goals, how goals affect your broader financial strategy, and why most people discover the key to achieving their goals lies in one word. You guessed it, that's income. And of course, income specialist and best-selling author Jeff Small will be back with us again today, and we'll also hear from other income specialists throughout the country. Plus, we're going to be answering your retirement questions as usual. But first, let's take a moment and talk about how to approach this goal-setting process. You know, it's one thing to make a list of New Year's resolutions every year and then try to stick to it. It's quite another to try to map out what you plan to do for the rest of your life. In fact, the very idea of identifying your retirement goals can seem daunting. I get that. And that's one of the main reasons a lot of people fail to do it. Another reason is fear. People avoid identifying goals because they're afraid that they'll never be in a financial position to actually achieve them. But that line of thinking is not just dangerously negative, but it's irrational. Here's the point. Regardless of how daunting it might seem, setting goals is truly the first important step toward enjoying a successful retirement. But you're probably thinking, okay, great, well, when do I start and how do I start? Well, as far as the when is concerned, the answer is now, because the sooner, the better. As to how, I find that a good first step is to try to nail down first the age at which you plan to retire. And that answer is going to depend upon a whole bunch of factors, but some people mistakenly believe that they have less choice in the matter than they actually do. And for many, age 65 seems to be a reasonable and realistic age. And in large part, that's because that's when Medicare benefits start. Of course, at 65, you can start taking Social Security even before that. Still, you may be planning to retire as an alternative before age 65, or as another alternative, maybe long after that. Or you may choose not to retire at all, which is great because you really love your job. But either way, once you've answered this question, then you'll be in a better spot to identify your specific retirement goals. Now, how specific should they be? And what should these goals look like? Is the question I typically get at this point. Well, the answer to the first question is the more specific, the better. And as far as the second question goes, here are some things to think about and some questions to ask yourself as you go through this goal setting process. Do you plan to stay put when you retire, or are you going to move? If you decide to move, to where? Is it going to be more expensive or less expensive? Try to narrow it down because the cost of living can differ greatly and is really an important part of the decision. Also, what would you like to do there? So this means visualizing your day-to-day life in retirement and really dreaming about your ideal retirement, what it looks like. Is it involving golf? Is it involving fishing every day? Is that going to make you happy or fulfilled? How about going out to dinner more often with friends? The reality is there's no right answer because it all depends upon your interests. Do your goals include traveling? Well, if so, where and when? Is it going to be a week in Europe when you're 68? A cruise when you're in your 70s? You know, and please don't think too much about whether or not that goal is feasible at this point. If you really want it, make it a goal. You might be surprised what you can accomplish with the right planning. But finally, ask yourself whether you think you want to make a major purchase when you retire. Vacation home, a boat, anything like that. If so, you need to include it as one of your goals, and then write down all of your goals. Then give yourself a break, congratulate yourself, because at least now you have a vision of where you're headed, which means you can start working on a strategy designed to achieve these goals, which is something we'll talk about in just a moment. But before I welcome Jeff Small, let's take a minute to answer one of your questions on today's topic. And this one's from Judy in Connecticut, and she says, I know what my hopes are for retirement, but I'm not sure I'd call them goals. What's the difference? Judy, great question. And here's the simple answer. Hopes are generic. They're not specific. Sometimes it means they don't have a dollar amount attached to them. You know, I want to buy a second home. Well, is that a $200,000 second home or a $500,000 second home? Or they're too generic because they don't have time frames attached. To be a goal, you've got to be specific and you've got to have a time frame attached. So Judy, thanks so much. And also be sure to send me your retirement questions by emailing us at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. Now, let's bring in Jeff Small, president of Arbor Financial Services, a retirement income store in Melbourne, Florida. And of course, my esteemed co-host here on The Income Generation. Jeff, great to have you back, of course, to talk about something I know is near and dear to your heart, goal setting.
You know, Dave, I almost changed your name to Tony Robbins there as you were going over all of those goals. However, we know that fear is a great motivator. It's what motivates us to do a lot of stuff. You said earlier that not setting your goals is illogical if it's not based out of fear. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you know, you have to tackle what you're afraid of head on. I have a good friend who's turning age 80. He's actually a yacht captain. And he said something to me years ago I respect a lot. He says, Dave, if I'm not doing something every day that scares the heck out of myself, then I'm not living. And you know, I thought that was incredible wisdom. So if you fear it, you still have to plan for it, because all of a sudden, now you can build a plan and you won't be so fearful once you have that plan.
Good. Well, you know, that's a good thing. You said he was a captain all the way to age 80. That brings me up to my next question here, Dave. I think that a lot of people transition from their private sector job into a new career in their 60s and 70s. And so for those folks that never really plan on working, what type of goals should they be setting in retirement as well?
Well, they need to have contingency goals, because you may want to work your entire life, but God may have another plan for you. You know, your health may not hold out long enough and you may be forced into retirement. So like a good pilot or a good boat captain, you always have to have plan A, but you also have to have plan B in case plan A fails, and plan C in case plan B fails. And we're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to introduce our next guest, someone who knows a lot about having backup plans, as he is a CPA by background and an income specialist, as you know, with our group, Jeff. And that's Michael Eastham, based out of Orlando, Florida. So we'll be back here in just a moment on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you in a minute.
Women are an economic powerhouse. We earn, control, and inherit more wealth than ever before. Our lives are truly a balancing act. It's not easy to juggle a career, a marriage, caregiving, and other life transitions. Yet we always rise to meet the challenge. Take charge of your retirement planning today so you can leave a legacy for your family tomorrow. Download our free Women and Wealth Guide to Retirement Planning. Find strategies to help grow, manage, and protect your assets. Visit womenandretirementnow.com.
Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and of course it's great to be here with all of you talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is goal setting. So far we've talked about how to begin identifying retirement goals and some things you need to think about during that goal setting process. So now what? Well, as the saying goes, a goal without a plan is really just a wish. So now that you've identified these specific goals, now it's time to start working on a strategy that's designed to help you achieve them. And that process starts with answering 3 important questions. Number 1, where am I now? You don't need to answer this question right away, but you should try to get a general sense. And it's not really just a matter of asking yourself how much you've saved for retirement. It also means asking how long you have until your retirement date, your goal. Now, if you have a spouse, you both need to get together to make sure your retirement goals are aligned and to determine where you are as a couple. Next important question to examine is, what's my time frame? And it means not just determining how long you have until your target retirement goal, but establishing a time frame for achieving some or all of your goals within retirement. The third and final question is, are my goals realistic? Now, you don't really need to do a deep dive quite yet on this. We'll get to that. But generally, you should be able to get a good sense of where the goals you identified are practical and potentially achievable. And this should happen once you've determined your starting point and your time frame. So now let's get to another one of your questions. Alan from Maryland says, is it possible to set your goals even if you're not sure when you want to retire? Well, Alan, yes, and what you might want to do is try to figure a range and set your goals on the earliest point and set your goals on the latest point. And then, when you build the plan, you can then determine, okay, can I hit that earlier time or am I going to miss it? Am I going to get forced back to the later time? And that might give you some insight also as to whether you want to take the early out or hang in there a bit longer if you can. So Alan, great question. And also, please be sure to send me all of your retirement questions by emailing us at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. And now, let's bring back in our good friend, Jeff.
So, Dave, you and I have seen lots of unknowns over the years with our clients when it comes to financial issues like obligations of an aging parent, or maybe even grown children need money. A lot of people in that generation deal with all types of issues like that. How do you account for them when setting your goals?
Yeah, I know you and I always refer to it, Jeff, as the sandwich generation, right? And we didn't coin that phrase, but it could be planning for kids that boomerang back to the house and also parents at the same time. And of course, we're sandwiched in the middle. And I think you need to plan for that contingency and factor it in, especially in the case of parents or maybe disabled children. But then you also need to know how realistic it is, because if you know you can't afford to do that, then you've got to make that clear up front, because some people, in the spirit of taking care of their loved ones, their children, their parents, they bankrupt their own retirements and they have absolutely no contingency plan. So if I can urge you as viewers, as listeners, one thing, you need to be a little bit selfish here. No matter how much you love your families, being a little bit selfish will ensure that when your health declines, now you won't have to be dependent upon your children. Right, Jeff?
That's correct, Dave. And so, but the first thing you got to do is get ahead of the process, though. So I know how I do it with clients and new folks that I meet. But at what point should any financial advisor be involved in that early stage goal setting process?
Well, it depends if you have the right financial advisor or not. So if you have a total return-based financial advisor who always talks to you about what you earned last year, then you might be better off keeping that person a bay for a while, because that person's not really an income specialist. However, if you have an advisor that's truly an income specialist, the answer, Jeff, as you know, is get that person involved now. Get that person involved as soon as humanly possible.
Well, you said that very important part, Dave. Where am I now is more than a matter of how much you have in savings, but that is a big part of it too, right?
Oh, absolutely. So you have to think about, okay, do I have debt? Do I want to carry my debt into retirement? Okay. You also have to think about your job. How secure is your job? How secure is the industry? It's one thing to have goals, but to realize that you could be forced into retirement before that. And let's face it, when you get into your 60s, it's hard for a lot of folks to find a job at that stage. So you need to be brutally honest with yourself about really everything about where you are today, because it's like going from point A to point B with a roadmap, right? You need to know where you're going, but you also need to know where you are. If you think you're in someplace else, well then you're not going to end up where you want to go. You're going to take a wrong turn somewhere along the way. And now it's time to bring in our next guest, of course, Michael Eastham. Michael is the founder of Fellowship Financial, a retirement income store just outside of Orlando. And he's also Amazon best-selling author of the book, Common Sense Income Strategies. Michael, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
It's my pleasure. Always good to be back with you guys.
So Mike, it's great to see you, but you have literally written the book on income and investing with common sense dividends, correct?
Yeah, I have.
All right, so I've got that book right here in my lobby. Folks pick it up all the time. Tell us about your background and what qualifies you to be an income specialist.
Well, yeah, thanks for asking, Jeff. I've been a CPA for over 30 years now, and I think that having that CPA designation, one of the things that I started out doing was, analyzing financial statements. And by doing that, we realized that companies have to be profitable in order to survive. Well, that's the same thing that people need to understand if they're going to survive in retirement. It's generating income, and so as a result of that, I went on to get my personal financial specialist designation, which is CPAs that specialize in financial planning, and I've been loving life doing that ever since. And so by educating people, radio program, my book, talking to guys like you, and then of course helping people to understand the importance of income, that has kind of developed my background along the many decades.
Not too many guys can say that, Michael, so that my hat's off to you. That's a wow factor right there. So tell me how that assists you with goal setting and determining what folks' goals should be when they retire. How do you utilize that, and what do you tell them?
Yeah, a lot of people think that the goal setting side is just this fluffy thing that's out there, and they don't spend a lot of time on it. I try to make folks realize that can be the number one important thing to take into consideration, because goals, they're dreams that you want to accomplish in retirement. But guess what? Goals in many cases have costs associated with them. And so if you don't factor those costs into your retirement planning, well, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so that's a key piece that unfortunately isn't talked about much.
Well, speaking of that, you get to have that epiphany meeting with folks where you're doing that top-down study on what income they're going to have prior to retiring and then what income they're going to have after retiring. Tell us how you transition folks like that.
Well, once they actually have the discovery that, yeah, you know what, if I want to travel in retirement, well, I got to have money to do that. If I want to go on missions trips, I have to have money to do that. If I want to help my grandchildren pay for their college education or put a down payment on their house, they have that epiphany. They don't really think about it. So as a normal part of our process, our planning process, we talk about goals. We talk about the costs of goals. And then we formulate that into their budget when we try to build up not only the need for income, but then also the source of their income.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, that's what I love so much about you, is that you come from a left brain background as a CPA, but you're really strong with that right brain goal setting process also that your clients need so very much. So thanks again for being such a good friend of the Income Generation.
Always a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And Jeff, you gave us the perfect segue. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the right way and the wrong way to determine your retirement income needs. I'm David Scranton. This is the Income Generation, and we'll be right back.
For behind-the-scenes photos, retirement planning tips, and upcoming giveaways, follow the Income Generation Show on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch video clips, guest interviews, and to catch up on past episodes.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and of course, it's wonderful to be here with all of you today as we talk about this all-important concept of goal setting. So, where have we gotten so far? Well, we've decided so far, we've talked about how to identify goals and now start working on your strategy for achieving them. Now, let's look at how your goals fit more broadly into your overall financial plan. Because some people mistakenly think that retirement planning starts and ends with one simple question. How much money do I need to accumulate by retirement in order to be able to retire, right? And you've probably heard some analysts try to answer that question in a broad sense. Perhaps you've heard a popular notion that's been around for years that says you need about $1 million in savings and assets in order to retire comfortably. Others say, well, you need 80%, the 80% rule, essentially where you need 80% of your working income into retirement. The problem with these guidelines is that they're oversimplifications. And the reality is that retirement is going to be dramatically different for one person versus another, depending upon a whole bunch of things. And that's for that reason, really, that it makes a better approach to answering the question, doing something I call a top-down budget analysis. Now, what is top-down budget analysis? Well, you're not going to see any books. It's a phrase that I actually coined. But what it means is identifying all the expenses that are going to go away once you quit work. Things like your FICA tax, which you no longer will have to pay, possibly your mortgage payment if you plan to get your mortgage paid off, or your 401k savings, because you won't be doing that once you retire. Why? Because by subtracting these expenses, you may realize that the cost of maintaining the same lifestyle you have now will be a lot less. Now, that's the starting point. From that point on, you can now start factoring in additional costs that have to do with achieving your retirement goals. So it gives you a baseline, today's lifestyle, and then you build from there. Now, another important issue when it comes to this question is to avoid complacency. What do I mean by that? Well, it means assuming your savings is enough to live comfortably just because you have over $1 million or some other supposed magic number in your accounts. You know that there are many millionaires have gone broke by being complacent about their net worth. And that brings me to one of the most important questions. And it's less important to focus on a particular lump sum than it is to focus on having the right strategy, which really means geared toward the right amount of income that you need to achieve your goals and to really minimize or almost eliminate the risk of asset spend down. But it's also going to help you prepare for all your possible contingencies and align, like I said, with your goals. And that's why identifying these goals in the first place is one of the most important factors in having a successful retirement. In fact, you might say it's the most crucial. Now let's get to another one of your questions. Frank from Illinois says, Dave, what if I do have over $1 million in savings and I know it'll be up to $1.5 million by the time I retire? Well, I think what you're referring to, Frank, is, isn't that enough? Do I really have to worry about it? And the answer is absolutely not, because you have to ask yourself, how much income is that $1 million generating today? How much income in the form of interest and dividends will that $1.5 million generate down the road? And depending upon when you retire and how long you might live, and if you're in decent health, that could be 30 years into retirement, will I be able to keep up with inflation? So please, Frank, whatever you do, please, 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 and hear me on this, don't fall in the trap of complacency. Many have done it, and it usually leads to, at some point, a retirement that's subpar. And be sure to send me your retirement questions by emailing us at askdave@theretirementincomeStore.com. So, Jeff, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think, Dave, great minds think alike. I mean, I also recommend a top-down budget analysis as well. And it's funny to look at the expression of that consumer's face when we show them what their real numbers are going to be. But can you explain a little more about how that also works? You touched a little bit on it before.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, top-down doesn't mean that you have to take your shirt off in order to do it, right, Jeff? I mean, you leave your shirt on, it's fine. The point, though, is that, by subtracting the expenses that are going to go away, it gives you the amount of income you would need today if you were retired to live the same lifestyle you have today. Now, from a visceral standpoint what that lifestyle is, and is that adequate? But like I said, it's only a start. Then you have to add on the other things that you're going to want to do that maybe you haven't had time to do so far because you're working full time. And again, Jeff, as you know, it's just better up than a bottom-up approach, because a bottom-up approach is where you go through your checkbook, you try to add all your expenses together. Inevitably, if you do that, you end up missing something that's important and you underestimate. And that's why top-down is so powerful. It helps prevent you from underestimating your income needs.
It does, but something that can also underestimate you or hurt you is something called complacency, Dave, and we see our fair share of that. Most people might think they're overcomplacent if they have too much savings to meet their goals and they're not worried about market risk. However, you can't be sure of that until you've identified your goals, can you?
No, you really can't, and that's a great thing because you're probably complacent. You're probably going by a rule of thumb saying, well, I can live off 70%. I make it 100,000. I can live off 70,000 a year. Factoring Social Security, I need 35,000 a year. Gosh, I've got $1 million. I could spend down the principal and live for 30 years. Well, that's great, but A, you haven't factored in inflation, you haven't factored in medical costs, and of course, as you say, you haven't factored in your goals, because without your goals, you fail to add the things to it. And if you don't add stuff to it that you're going to want to do in retirement, you might end up sitting on the sofa eating bombs and watching soap operas all day. And Jeff, as you know, most of our clients don't retire to do that. They retire because there's things that they want to accomplish.
We cover that in the top-down talk.
That's right. So now it's time to introduce our next guest, Eric Lardner. Eric is the founder of Abundant Wealth Management, a retirement income store in Dallas, Texas. Eric, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
Great to be with you, Dave. Thank you.
So Eric, it's great to see you. I want to know specifically how you work with your clients when you just start to assess what their retirement picture is going to look like. How do you assess that and bring them a good picture of reality? Explain your process verbally for us.
Well, I think looking at the big picture first and working backwards from there, finding out exactly what their income needs are, and then putting together a plan using, more specific, shorter term goals in order to achieve the macro objective is, where we typically start.
Okay, well, that's good. But why is investing for income a better place for them than investing for growth at that stage of their lives?
Well, most people have, when they think about retirement, they think about it in macro terms. What they don't realize is that in retirement, the most important thing is not net worth necessarily, but having a consistent, stable, steady stream of income that's reliable.
Okay, and fixed income basically does that. So what types of things do we invest in to do that, to provide that reliability, that predictability in income?
We have a number of bond and bond-like instruments that we invest in, specialty ETFs, BDCs, things of that nature. Some things people are familiar with, some things people may not be familiar with, but we have a diversified list of investments that we can place people in that are safer and more consistent and more reliable.
Well, that's what everybody wants, I think. That's what they want today, correct? Safety, reliability, predictability?
That's the name of the game in retirement for sure.
Because if we have too much risk, then we've got, huge macro problems there at some point down the line. Occasionally we see folks come into the office here, and you probably have the same thing in your hometown in Texas there, where somebody's pulling out money randomly from their portfolio with no interest earnings of any kind. Have you ever run into that?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. That's not uncommon, unfortunately. And when I encounter people that are in that circumstance, it's a code red scenario. You've got to get them out of that cycle so that they don't run out of money in their lifetime.
Yeah, and that's what we call engineering income. And engineering is an important occupation, but not in the income world, that's for sure. Eric, thanks so much for being back with us here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.
Right after the commercial break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a concept that you probably haven't heard of, and it's purpose versus performance. What do we mean by that? Well, you're going to have to stay with us. I'm David Scranton. This is The Income Generation, and we'll be right back.
Did you know women typically receive less Social Security money when we retire? On average, we earn less money than our male coworkers. We're also more likely to take a break from the workforce to raise children. women generally receive at least 15% less in Social Security benefits. Have you done all you can to maximize your Social Security? Visit womeninretirementnow.com and download our free Women's Guide to Retirement Planning. Learn more about the challenges women face in today's world, as well as unique solutions to achieve your retirement goals.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and it's great to have you all with us today as we talk about this all-important topic of goal setting. And so far, we've talked about how to set your goals, how to begin preparing your strategy to meet them, and why having the right strategy is in many ways more important than aiming toward a lump sum number. But the question becomes, what is the right strategy? Well, I find that once you've identified your goals, the answer to that question becomes painfully clear. Why? Well, for one thing, if you're like most people, you realize that your goals are purpose-based rather than performance-based, which means that you're not investing for a financial goal, a certain number, or to achieve maximum return. Instead, you're investing for a particular purpose. And that purpose is now spelled out in your goals. And for most people, those goals are reasonably similar, right? You want to live comfortably in a nice place. You might want to do some traveling, enjoy your hobbies, visit your children and grandchildren, and to do it all without worrying about money and market fluctuations and so on. So once you've identified these purpose-based goals, then a second thing becomes obvious. And that is these are not the kinds of goals you want to pay for by selling shares of your stocks or shares of your mutual funds. I mean, it almost sounds silly, but still a lot of people fall into that trap. But in a better way, you want to pay for these goals from regular income. And in my experience, once you realize this, it's like a light bulb suddenly flips. That's when you see why investing directly for income makes so much sense. So think about it. If income is your top retirement priority, then why shouldn't it be your top investment priority, right? Why shouldn't it be the cornerstone of your financial strategy? And the answer is that in most cases, it should be. Because remember that total return is really a sum of both growth and income. Of course, growth is measured in the form of capital gains. Income is measured in the form of interest and dividends. So investing for income simply shifts your strategic focus from the G to the I. And in my experience, it's a strategy that not only aligns properly with your purpose-based goals, but better prepares you to meet a lot of the financial challenges that are unique to retirement. Things like healthcare inflation, planning for RMDs, when to take your Social Security, estate planning issues. Because remember, investing for income does not mean sacrificing total return. It just means focusing on getting that return from income instead of growth. And you can continue to grow your portfolio organically through strategic reinvestment. Okay? Now let's take one more question from you. Lynn from Florida says, Dave, does investing for income mean pulling all my money out of the stock market? Well, absolutely not. In reality, you can focus on higher dividend common stocks and still get a decent amount of income. Now, it's not contractually guaranteed like bonds or a lot of the bond-like instruments. But the counter argument to that is good, healthy companies typically raise dividends over time. They don't drop dividends. So depending upon your risk tolerance, keeping a chunk of money in the stock market might make sense, but it's going from a G focus, a growth focus in the market, to more of an income-based focus. Now it's time to bring back someone, of course, who's no stranger to that, and that's Jeff Small. And Jeff, I know you've done a lot of work over your years in helping people get income, whether it's outside the stock market or inside the stock market, quite frankly.
Well, there's no doubt, Dave, we both have. But, you know, I've seen the income light bulb go on people far too often once they realize what they can actually generate. But one of the first questions they usually have is, why didn't their advisor explain this to them already? Why wasn't it an option in other firms? Can you respond to that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, it's an option, as you know, but most people are stuck in a growth-based model. Most advisors today that you want to work with, they've been around for over 20 years. They got involved in the 80s and 90s, the best stock market in U.S. history. So their paradigm became growth. And even though it didn't work so well at the turn of the century, they never really learned how to invest for income. Whereas those who became financial advisors in the 60s or 50s, which are now long retired, they knew how to invest for income. So it's heavily a generational thing.
Well, Dave, I know we really talk a lot about income a lot. That's kind of our go-to on the show here because it's a very vital part of how people should invest going forward. But how can investing for income, from your perspective, meet your goals, an investor's goals, a retiree's goals, with a lot less worry than investing for growth?
Yeah, well, because it's that bird in the hand. And as I said, the question we just had from our viewer, even if you want to invest for income in the stock market, just because the stock market might take a drop in value, stock might go down, doesn't mean that the income is going to drop. So it may not be guaranteed contractually, but it's stickier. So it gives people more confidence and, frankly, statistically speaking, a much lower chance of spending down principal. So Jeff, now it's time to bring in our final guest, and that is Nathan Cox, co-founder of Retirement Income Solutions, a retirement income store located in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville. Nathan, thanks so much for being back with us on the Income Generation.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to be here.
So Nathan, it's great to see you. But I want to go over a couple of things with you today, and I'd like to know what your feeling is on purpose-based investing versus performance-based investing for members of the Income Generation, and what's the difference?
Purpose versus performance. I got you. Well, my opinion is purpose-based investing is critical when you are nearing retirement age, or especially if you're already retired. Performance-based investing is fine if you're in that accumulation stage of your life, right? But when you start making that transition from performance to a need for income in your retirement, to me, it makes perfect sense to make the transition to purpose-based investing. Your money has a purpose at that point, right?
That's true. So it's not really about accumulation anymore as much as it is about income. Income seems to take precedence over that. So on that note, though, Nathan, what do you see as the biggest mistakes people make in retirement when they don't follow a purpose versus performance-based strategy?
Well, they just don't make that transition. They keep on the same track of performance-based investing and they rely on performance to try to generate income. I saw that back in the 1990s. In fact, I was taught and firmly believed during that time that in a fairly new concept that relying on growth and capital appreciation was perfectly acceptable to generate income. And what we found in the early 2000s is that just wasn't the case. It just didn't work out so well.
And as you know, Nathan, as a baseball player, performance, hey, you want to hit a home run every time, right? But there's times you need to make a sacrifice bunt, and that's, purposeful baseball, not necessarily performance baseball. So did your career as an athlete, did that help you along with this concept, make it easier for you in helping clients today?
Well, sure. I mean, I played for several years and coached even longer than that. And it's really all about winning the game, right? Sometimes you have to play small ball, as they say. Bunting and doing some base stealing and some things of that nature occasionally, going back to the fundamentals of the game. And it's not that much different than investing, really.
Yeah, very much the same. So I thought for sure some of those parallels from your athletic career would certainly carry forward. And it's good that they are. And the people in Nashville are certainly grateful for that and grateful for having you, as we are. So thanks again for being back with us here on the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
A wise man once said, how will you ever get there if you don't know where you're going, right? And those words of wisdom apply to retirement planning as we discussed today. So please, please, please don't be daunted by this idea of goal setting. Dive right in, and the sooner, the better. And again, begin by pinpointing when you plan to retire. Then ask questions and write down the answers. Do you plan to move? If so, to where? What will your daily life look like in retirement? What will you be doing? How much will it cost you? Will you travel or make a major purchase? Once you've answered these questions, then please answer 3 more. Where am I now? What's my time frame? And how realistic are my goals? And then make modifications if needed. Now you're ready to crunch some numbers. But remember, your retirement savings lump sum isn't really the most important part of the equation, because at the end of this process, you're going to realize that identifying your retirement goals has given you the key to creating a strategy that's uniquely designed to help you achieve your specific goals. And most of the time, that's with the help of the right advisor. And if you're like most people, you'll realize that strategy can be summed up in a single word. You guessed it, income. Thanks for joining me once again on the Income Generation, and a special guest, of course, to our good friend, Jeff Small, and all of our guests. We've had a blast here with you today. Bottom line, if you're close to or you're in retirement and you're concerned about your money, as you know, it's essential that you stay informed and up to date. And right here is where you can do it on the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll see you next week.